Welcome to What's Your Story, where I bring guests to you every week who are authentic and they're genuine. They share information and insights that you can use to improve your life, your business, yourself. Today, our topic is what is a business psychologist and how the heck can they help a business? And today my guest is Gary Dumais, because business psychologists often are misunderstood and underutilized in the marketplace. So, with nearly 15 years of experience, Gary has established himself as a subject matter expert in the candidate selection space, as well as general HR consultant. Today, Gary will provide greater clarity, insight, advice to help us all raise our personal effectiveness around this aspect of human capital management. Gary, welcome to What's Your Story?
Charlie, thanks for having me.
So let's get into it. What is a business psychologist? I'm sure if some people in a company hear that term, they get a little nervous. So would you share with the audience, what does it mean in today's workplace?
It can mean a number of things, Charlie. In today's workplace, my specialty is helping companies avoid bad hires. So my background is actually in clinical psychology, so I have a doctorate in clinical psychology. I also earned my Senior Professional and Human Resource Certification, or SPHR, as it's more widely known. So I have that background. I have the psychology background, especially when it comes to psychological assessment. And I apply that to assessing candidates for companies to make sure they've got the right person for the right role, especially when it comes to important roles like managers, directors, even key individual contributors.
So one of the things that I constantly keep hearing is about recruiters. Are you a recruiter?
Charlie, thank you for asking me that question. Usually when I start telling folks about what a business psychologist does and what I do in particular, they'll stop me, pretty short into it and say, oh yeah, I get what you're like a recruiter, I get it.
Like me.
You got it. So what I usually do is I say, well, no, there's a clear distinction between what I do and what recruiters do. And sometimes I use the analogy of buying a home. So if you've been through the home buying process, you're probably used to working with a real estate agent, and the real estate agent would be analogous to a recruiter. So the real estate agent's going to listen and say, okay, what kind of things are you looking for in a home? They're going to go out and search for a few homes, and they're going to say, hey, I've got the home for you. Me, I'm more like the home inspector. Once you think, yeah, this might be the place for me, I'll come in and I've got special tools to see if there's radon gas in the basement, if there's cracks in the foundation, so to speak, leaks in the roof, what have you. So I'll do that assessment and I'll let you really know what you're getting with that home. I'll make a recommendation and we'll go from there. So that's the distinction between a recruiter and assessor.
Thanks for making that clarification. I speak to a lot of CEOs. They're most concerned today of getting the right person in the right seat, on the right bus, the right fit,
right?
Because a lot's at stake today.
Yeah.
And would you share with us a little bit about the process you use? I hear a lot of people say they can do this, but share with us what makes you a little bit different than others in that space.
Expertise, number one. I mean, I've seen a lot of changes in the industry over the years. One change that I've seen in particular is that test publishers, they want to sell more of their assessments. And so what they're doing is basically getting sales folks and training them how to use their assessments and then going from there. And so I see a lot of companies having their trusted advisor when it comes to how to use psychological assessments to assess folks. That person really doesn't have a strong background in understanding psychometrics, interviewing techniques, things of that nature. So I have a doctorate in clinical psychology. I actually got my start working in neurodiagnostic labs of hospitals where these sorts of assessments are used to understand if someone had a bump on the head, or maybe it's suspected that they might be suffering from dementia, or maybe they had a stroke. Similar assessments are used to determine how is the person functioning, how much were they affected by whatever particular ailment is occurring with them, that kind of thing. So I have that background and I can bring that to the business space. That's a lot of expertise, that's a lot of knowledge. And when you're making important decisions, about who to put in a key role for your company, if it were me, I would want a thorough understanding of that person, their strengths and weaknesses, and how well they fit in the company. One other point of consideration, it's not just about the assessments. It's not just about the interview. I've also have to have a great understanding of the company, not just the particular role. You know, what are the success factors required for a particular role?
Excuse me.
Bless you. But also,
Those assessments make me nervous.
but also, what is the company culture? I can't tell you how fantastically important that is. I mean, you could really have a candidate who, let's say, does quote unquote well on the assessments, but they still might not be a good fit for the company culture. You know, what works well at Google might not work well at Wells Fargo, and I keep coming back to this idea of a trusted advisor. So knowing the assessments, knowing the company, knowing how to interpret the assessment results. I mean, even sometimes you have to take into consideration organizational politics.
Can you give us an example of a real-life case study where these factors have come into play?
Well, they always come into play. Charlie, do you want to, I mean, I could share with you some interesting assessment stories if that's
Yeah,
what
sure.
you're...
Yeah, the audience would like to get an idea, make this real for them.
Okay, sure. So I'll take a recent example. A company that I'm working with now, they're already using an assessment before they even came to me. So
An assessment.
an assessment. So what they're doing is they're sourcing candidates. They're having candidates take do a phone screen interview, and then they're also having candidates do a very brief assessment of their cognitive abilities, their problem-solving abilities, their decision-making skills, their ability to think logically, which is great. That's great. It's great practice, almost best practice, because cognitive abilities and skills are one of the strongest predictors of success in professional roles. So I commend them for that. So what happened is they had a candidate go through the phone screen, did great, took this quick cognitive assessment, also did great. Now it was time for my assessment, and part of my assessment battery is cognitive assessments, also personality assessments, but not just one cognitive assessment, not just one personality assessment. Human beings are far too complex to be understood with just one assessment. So I have, for cognitive assessments, I use timed ones, I used untimed ones. I take a look at deductive reasoning, which is like critical thinking. I take a look at inductive reasoning, which is strategic thinking. Anyway, so the same candidate went through my series of assessments, or my battery of assessments, and did not do very well on the cognitive piece. Some aspects the person did well, some aspects the person didn't do so well. On closer inspection, I noticed that the person was not doing well on any cognitive assessment that went over 20 minutes. And then I take a look at the personality data, and what do I find? The personality data suggests that the person is incredibly impatient. And so now the story starts to come together. Here we've got a person who their impatience can get the best of them, and even if they do have strong cognitive abilities, anything past 20, 30 minutes, especially on a bad day for them, it's not going to go so well.
So what was the decision?
So the decision was not to hire the candidate, and they avoided a bad hire. But if
We need to take a break.
Oh, okay.
But when we come back,
could talk all
the
day.
whole idea of return on investment from these assessments and the time that you take, it's going to be very interesting to hear your point of view. The audience would be interested in that. So we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to What's Your Story? My guest today is Gary Dumais. He is a business psychologist. He was just explaining to the audience how he determines the suitability of one candidate for another and makes a recommendation to his client. So it's obvious that you have lots of passion about this. You're very, very committed to doing this. So how did you get here? What's the journey been like for you? You didn't, in high school, want to be a business psychologist, so how did you get here?
Charlie, I've always been fascinated by people. At a young age, I recognized that I like to understand how things work. And I recall thinking to myself, well, people are the most interesting and complex entities ever known. So if I could understand the human brain, if I could understand the mind, That'd never get dull. You know, I'd always be interested in that kind of thing. So I followed my interests in college, and I studied psychology. And while I was in college, I did an internship in a neurodiagnostic lab of a general hospital. So if folks aren't familiar with what a neurodiagnostic lab is, it's that part of the hospital where if somebody suffered a stroke, or they may have dementia, or maybe, you know, they're a football player and they got a bump on the head, that kind of thing. And people have questions about their cognitive functioning, or did their personality change? Can they return to work? That sort of thing. In that neurodiagnostic lab, you give kind of paper and pencil type tests of personality, cognitive functions, puzzles, that sort of thing. And you make an assessment. You know, what are the strengths? What are their development opportunities? You know, and then go from there. I'll never forget my first day on that internship where I was shadowing a psychologist. I remember coming into his office, and he had kind of a small table, round table just like this, and on that table was the results of a personality assessment from a patient, and we were about to go interview the patient. So the psychologist that I'm shadowing went through the assessment with me and said, "Hey, Gary, we're going to, you know, interview this patient. Here's how her personality is going to be." And he started getting real specific. And Charlie, I got to be honest with you, I was a little skeptical. You know, I said, "Hey, did you meet the patient already?"
Right.
He said, "No, I haven't met her." And I said, "Well, how long did it take her to complete this assessment thing here?" And you know, he said, "Oh, about 45 minutes, and it's just true/false questions." So again, I was skeptical, but we went to meet with the patient. We interviewed the patient, and my gosh, Charlie, was he right? He was so spot on about her personality characteristics that my jaw dropped. And I said, at that moment, I said, "This is it. This is the key. If I want to really understand people, here are the tools to do it." And it was at that moment that I said, that's what I want to pursue in my career. That's what I want to pursue in my graduate education. And that's why I went to a graduate school that focused on psychological assessment. I mean, even things like the Rorschach, you know, the ink blot test. You know, there's objective methods to understanding that. There's a whole score. You know, that stuff interests me to no end. And so that experience really had an impact in my career.
So you've held a number of positions along the way. You pivoted a couple times to get to your own practice.
Yes.
Could you share with the audience some of those stops along the way?
Yeah, sure. So because I went to a clinical doctoral program, I did a fair amount of clinical work, and I enjoyed it. But at the same time, I came to recognize that, hey, you can do these assessments out in the business world. You know, for selecting people for roles and things of that nature. So early on in my career, I started to angle my career trajectory that way. So a quick example of that is to finish out my doctoral program. For anyone to finish out their doctoral program in psychology, they have to do a year-long internship. My peers were doing them at hospitals and things like that. I said, you know what, I'm going to go do mine for a consulting firm. My peers said, good luck with that. I did have good luck with that. So I did my internship for a consulting firm, and then from there I worked for the large human resource consulting firms. I'm talking like the global HR consulting firms, the Korn Ferries of the world and stuff like that. One of my clients, so I was an external consultant, one of my clients said, hey Gary, can you come in and help us make our HR department more strategic? Can you be our HR manager? And Charlie, I couldn't pass up that opportunity because that would give me a good sense of what things are like on the inside. So, what are the challenges that human resources faces on the internally within a company? So I did that for a few years. That's when I got my SPHR. And after that experience, I said, I feel like I am now ready to go out on my own. And that's what I did. I moved to Philadelphia, started my own business called Select Human Resources, did some networking, got my first client, did good work, got referred to other clients. It's been 10 years now.
Wow. In retrospect, it looks like there was a good plan in place. You got diversified experience that applies to what you're doing now. So at the core of this, somebody has to have inspired you along the way, or groups of people have inspired you to do this kind of work because you're passionate about it.
Yeah.
Could you share that with us?
In terms of inspiration, I think that one internship experience where I shadowed the psychologist, I think that was crucially important. One other thing that I recognized about kind of my own journey was, at a point I said, you know what, I'm doing HR stuff internally. If you want a quote-unquote real job. You know, you should work for a large company and you should aspire to be in the corner office and that kind of thing. And I remember walking around Philadelphia and, you know, I noticed, hey, there's a law firm over there. That's kind of their own business. That's a small, you know, there's a restaurant over there. And I started thinking, hey, I could work for myself. Let me give this a try. So going all the way back to that one psychologist that inspired me, but also just taking a look around and seeing other folks doing their own thing and saying, maybe I should give that a try, was a real inspiration for me.
Working inside a corporation like you did, there's only a limited amount of impact that you can have. Now
True.
when you come in from the outside and you're brought in by the senior leadership team, there's a likelihood you can have a greater impact.
Yeah.
Has that been your experience?
It has absolutely been my experience, and also, Charlie, as you probably know, there's some theory behind that too. And so in graduate school, I focused in on systems theory. I was in a clinical program, but again, I was trying to arc my career to go end up, you know, working in business and organizations anyway. So in clinical psychology, you can focus in on like family systems and stuff like that. A core tenet of that is that if you want to be able to change a system, if you want to be able to change a dynamic going on, it's really hard to do so if you're part of that dynamic. If you're an external consultant, you're coming in from the outside, it's much, I mean, it's still a challenge, but it's still, it's much less difficult to do, you know, to influence the system from outside.
I've heard so much about that I think you've chosen the right path. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back in a few minutes, and I want to talk a little bit about the ROI to corporations in bringing you in. We'll be right back. Welcome back to What's Your Story? Today my guest is Gary Dumais, a business psychologist. And Gary, you were just sharing with us how you go about doing your job and how you're benefiting companies. I have to be honest, and with the audience as well, there are many jobs that I got hired for, they should have never hired me. And had you been on the scene, I'm sure they wouldn't have hired me.
Okay.
Because again, what's on the surface isn't really what's going on underneath.
Okay.
So talk to us a little bit about the ROI or the economic benefits of bringing you in to an organization.
Thanks for asking me that question, Charlie. I get that an awful lot. Really, essentially what the question is what is the cost of a bad hire to a person's company or business? You know, when you think about it right off the bat, especially if you're talking for higher level roles, it's easily $100,000 or more when you factor in the search, the recruiting, the training, the onboarding. And then imagine you bring on somebody who is in a leadership role, they make the wrong decision. They drive the business into the ditch. You know, I mean, the cost can be astronomical. So that's one way to look at the cost. Another exercise that I'll engage people in is I'll ask them, I'll say, hey, think about an A player in your company, a real star performer. And I get them thinking about that and all the positive things that they've done for the business. And then I say, okay, think about, you know, a B level or maybe a C level performer. And then I ask that, you know, right away people are, you know, pretty visceral and, oh yeah, you know, I can think of this person. And they talk about some of the challenges it's presented, the cost it's created, things of that nature. And I said, you know, hey, if you could minimize that, you know, not have those C players and really get the A players, what is the return on investment for your business?
So you can create a model of the ideal A player for them.
Yes, and a lot of times what I will do is ask them, hey, tell me about the A players that you already have. And in some instances, I'll do an assessment on that A player. We'll call it a development assessment because that is the focus. You know, giving them some news they can use in terms of, hey, here's your strengths, and here's some things that you could do to be even more effective, either now or for the next level role. So it's good for the internal person being assessed for the development assessment, but it also gives me and the company some great information about what works in that role, what works for that, what kind of personality characteristics, what kind of thinking skills are required, and that can form a model for comparison for when we assess other folks for the company.
As you're talking, this question came to mind. There's a fact out there that 87% of the people that are driving to work this morning don't want to go to that job on Monday. They want to go somewhere else. So what role can you play in improving employee engagement and getting people in the right seats on the right bus?
If you've ever been in a job, Charlie, where you feel like, yes, this job just fits my career aspirations, it fits my strengths, if you've ever had that feeling before, that's the answer to your question. So I can help with employee engagement and motivation by having someone come in the door who has the skills and abilities to be successful in the first place. It's a tough challenge when somebody enters a role that they're just not a good fit for, or the role's not a good fit for them. So just avoiding that instance in the very first place can certainly do a lot to motivate and engage employees.
Where's your whole field going? We hear all this stuff about AI and all these technologies that are infiltrating corporations,
Yeah.
replacing people.
Yeah.
How does that impact what you do?
I mean, even to hear you talk about it, Charlie, I think, hey, let's talk about AI doing art, doing just, what I do, there's a scientific component, but also there is an intuitive component, there's a human component to it. I don't think and I don't trust an algorithm to make a good decision about a person. Those algorithms can only be as good as you program them, and I'll tell you all the time when I'm assessing folks, it's a battery of information, it's a lot of data points, but there's a lot of tangible and intangible considerations like company culture. How do you program company culture into an AI?
That's true.
How do you do that? When I sit with the senior leadership team, I'll ask them questions about their company culture, and they'll give me kind of the standard, but I've got to develop that rapport with them. I've got to know how to ask the right questions to get them to really say, okay, Gary, yeah, here's what it's really like to work here. An AI can't do that. And even a programmer putting together an algorithm, can they get that out of the senior leadership team? Do they know what to ask? Can they leverage their experience in that regard? I don't think so at this point. So in sum, the AI stuff scares me because too often, I've been there. I've been an HR manager, and I know the pressures. It's, hey, avoid bad hires, do it for no money, and do it quick, right? Almost an impossible charter. But then you've got these quick fixes, these 1995 lose all the weight you want in a week type of solutions, as I sometimes think of them. And I just think, gosh, it's the wrong way to go. Go see an expert. If the role matters, if it's an important role, don't leave it up to a 10-minute assessment. Go see somebody who can really do what you're looking for them to do, give you the answer, help you understand the person.
My takeaway today from our conversation is that you tend to disaggregate all of the pieces that go around people and jobs and what's required of them, and then you sort of integrate them together, synthesize them together, make sure they work.
Yeah.
So that you can advise so that the company can have better information
Yeah.
to make those decisions.
That's an excellent summary, Charlie. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of data points to consider.
Yeah.
There's a lot of data points to weigh. For something's going to be more important one day, another thing's going to be more important the next day. It is up to me to not only look at the assessment results, but look at the difference between assessments. Look at the gaps in between and understand those. Package it in a way that's readily understandable and actionable for a company. You're right, it's all about, it's intel, it's information, providing the senior leadership team with, okay, here's the information you need to make a good decision about who to put in this important role.
And that's almost impossible to put a value on. So I want to thank you for coming in today.
Thank you, Charlie.
This is the point in the show where you look into the camera and you make an offer. You tell the audience what you might be willing to do for them.
Sure. Audience, I invite you to give me a call. It doesn't cost anything to meet with me. I want to gain an understanding of what the challenges of your business are, what your needs might be. I'll be happy to provide some advice accordingly. And let's just chat and see where we can go from there. So that's how I start things. Very often the presenting problem or the presenting symptom is not really the root issue. So I want to talk with folks. And of course, it's absolutely free to do that. So you can reach me, 215-901-4589. is the best place to reach me by phone. Also, you can visit my website, selecthumanresources.com or SELHR.com for short. Both will work, and there's more information there.
Give that phone number one more time.
215-901-4589, Gary Dumais.
Gary, thank you for
Thank
sharing
you,
your
Charlie.
expertise. I am no longer in the fog about this. I want to thank you all for tuning in. We're going to be here again next week with another authentic guest who's going to share insights, advice for you to make you better at your work and your life. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend. See you soon.